Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Theological Library and a former dean up there in Wheaton at the School of Biblical and Theological Studies. Our purpose in these podcasts is really very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but to live it. Joining me today on Exegetically Speaking is an old friend sitting right here in my office, Dr. E. Randolph Richards. I know him as Randy, but his published name is usually E. Randolph Richards. Randy, great to see you.
David, thanks for letting me come. It really is good to see your digs here and enjoy a visit with you.
Well, you're here to actually be on a panel discussion today.
I am. Thanks for inviting me for that as well. Bill Mounts and I will get to chat a little bit about manuscripts.
Yeah, and about how the New Testament comes together. Now, you're the provost at Palm Beach Atlantic University down there in gorgeous West Palm Beach, Florida.
It is. Actually, from my office, I just look out over the ocean. It's a beautiful location, and I am the provost there. I will be for a little bit longer, and then when the summer comes, I will revert back to the classroom for a few more years. I'll be the research professor of biblical studies.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's start off with the way I normally do and just ask you how you got started reading biblical languages.
Well, seminary started me on this, and we started reading, you're required to take Greek, and I went in with the same lovely attitude that most people do, and started reading it and realized, wow, this is like so helpful. So in looking at how I wasn't motivated initially to get in there and realizing that, no one had really told me why I should take this besides the fact that it was required.
Yeah, what are the benefits, right?
Really, exactly. And so in a little book that I did with a great friend, Joey Dodson, we talk about why you should study Greek. And one of the lines we use is that reading the Bible in translation is like kissing your spouse through saran wrap. It's okay.
But it could be better.
It could be better. And so I would not want anyone who doesn't read Greek to think, I'm missing out. No, God spoke to me through Scripture long before I ever knew there was such a thing as Greek. But there's so many little subtleties I see, so many things where I think, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about one of those today. Yeah. We were chatting earlier about Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 16, and it's a parable that Jesus tells. It's one that sometimes you don't hear too many people talking about. It's one of those, it's kind of a hard saying of Jesus in a way. But let me just kind of go over the parable, and you give us a bit of background. Let's dig into the Greek, okay? So Jesus told this parable, saying, "The land of a rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you." Now that's a problematic translation there. "And the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? Once your soul is gone, who's going to take over, right? All your things, just like Ecclesiastes talks about. So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Give us a little bit of the background.
Sure, David. Americans generally don't like this parable. For one thing, it seems to go against our good Puritan value about savings, and I like to save. I've tried to save for retirement. And then also, it seems like God is saying, you have a bad attitude and I'm going to zap you tonight. So God the executioner is coming. One of the reasons, we might think, well, good, we like that kind of idea. But from my office, I can look out on Palm Beach Island, and there are a lot of people there who are living to a ripe old age. So it also, we don't like this parable much because it doesn't seem like God does it very often.
Yeah.
So there's several things we don't like about this parable.
Right. These folks seem to live a long time, and the good do die young.
Yeah,
many
the old
times.
joke is crime doesn't pay, but you look out there and you think, I don't know.
Not
So,
too sure.
so I think there's a couple problems with this. One is the background. There were things that people knew back then. All of Jesus's listeners lived as farmers in Palestine. They knew these things, and so Jesus doesn't mention them because everybody knew them. They go without being said, and that's. I like to say some of the most important things often go without being said.
Indeed.
So there's a little bit of a farming background that's kind of helpful to know. The issue is Jesus tells us this guy's already rich. He already has barns. He mentions, I'm going to tear down my barns. Well, he already has barns. Because, we think, well, you should save. You should save for all the needs that you might have. You can have a
rainy
really
day.
bad year. It could really rain, and so you could really have need. Well, this guy's a rich man. He already has barns like that. He's already built to provide for everything he'll need. You got to save some grain for seed. You have to feed as the patriarch of that clan. He's responsible for everybody in his, what the Greeks called household, which include employees, people who are under his influence, under the patron. He's got to provide for all those people. And, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit for some rainy days, some rainy years. So, Joseph in Egypt taught us that kind of thing. So he's already built all of that stuff. But he's had such a great year. He's going to fill all of his barns, provide for everything he can possibly need. And then he still doesn't have enough room for the grain that's left over. So he's going to spend some of his grain on expenses to tear down the barns that he has to build even bigger barns that will store more grain than he needs. And he says in the story, I will store all my grain then. So and the emphasis is on all my grain.
Yeah. And he talks about my crops, my barns, my this, right? My grain, my goods. And I'm going to say to my soul, soul.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's all good.
It's all good. And we might think, well, nice problem to have. Well, one of the things that went without being said was all around this guy are not just the people he's responsible for, but there's other people. And they don't have everything that they need. The story of Jesus' parable, Lazarus and the rich man. Here's another rich man who knew Lazarus by name and then doesn't care for him because he was not technically responsible for Lazarus. But he just needed to provide a little bit out of his excess. So this parable is not about saving. This parable is about what do you do if you are blessed enough to have excess wealth. And so that's what this parable is about. So that's kind of the background. But then there's a translational problem.
Yeah, and it comes down here to verse 20 of Luke 12. This translation says, God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you.
Right. So first off, let's point out, Jesus doesn't call people fool very often. It's a harsh statement to say. Fool, you are not. Now, this is in the wisdom tradition, where you have wise Israelites and foolish Israelites.
Sure.
So he's still considering this person one of his children. They're part of his covenant. But he is acting foolishly. Fool, this night, and we translate it, your soul is required of you. But the Greek is actually, they will require your soul from you. And since the they is not explicitly stated, translators just assume, well, it's kind of a elliptical sort of reference like the angels or whatever. But and so it's implied back God is going to demand his soul from him. And we take it as a reference to death. And yet if we think about it a moment, it becomes really apparent what Jesus means. They will require your soul from you. Who's the they? The riches. All the barns, all of that, they will require your soul.
His whole life will be given to just keeping all of that stuff up, right?
As you and I were joking, we've heard the old phrase, I don't own this stuff owns me. And it's true, and it goes back to Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus is saying the problem with that is then those riches own you. And the soul, which the man's heart, which should have been caring for the people around him. Now, first, he's got to take care of the grain and the seed. He's got to take care of his family. He has to take care of those in his extended household. But when you've done everything you need to do, including saving for a rainy day, if you're blessed enough to have a little excess wealth,
what do you do?
You should do something with it. And we think, well, what should you do with it? Well, in their world, there was a crowd in front of Jesus that knew what you needed to do with it.
The poor are always with you, right?
The poor are always with you.
Yeah.
And when you close your heart to them, you lose your soul.
It's not means then that you die.
No, you may live to be an old age.
Yeah. But you're a soulless old man.
Yeah.
A soulless old woman.
And our listeners won't have to ponder that very long to know the truth of that statement. They may even be unfortunate enough to know someone who has lost their soul to their wealth.
Randy, that's a great reading. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks to Ian Rosine, Rebecca Larson, and Silvio Vasquez, who helped us produce this podcast. Thanks as well to John Alonzma, our Wheaton-based director, who makes this podcast possible. We're grateful to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, then you need to consider Wheaton College. Whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, we have amazing programs, our first-rate faculty, and some of the best students in the world. So go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions about this or any of our podcasts, we'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions or questions about any passage in the Hebrew Bible or Greek New Testament, send us an email and we'll see if we can get one of our experts to weigh in on that for you. Our email is exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.